And I think you can just look at this year as a prime example. The dollar's down 10% and gold's up 38%. So you're talking almost a 50% swing. And if the state were to have been holding its reserves in gold, it would be far, far, far better off from a standpoint of purchasing power than it would be just holding it in dollars. All fiat currencies are inherently meant to die, and the policies of this current administration center around a weakening dollar and lowered interest rates, which is inflationary. This is why the smartest money in the world has been accumulating gold hand over fist, that being the central banks. And I would add into it somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 billion with a B dollars that we know of, and I would argue there's probably a lot more that isn't reported, has been delivered into the COMEX market since November. And you're talking the most well-informed, the most well-funded, and the most sophisticated traders on the planet. Now, who is doing this? Who's got those pockets? And so, yeah, I think that there is no question at the highest level, and the only ones who would vote against that would be the banks, because it takes away, obviously, much of their power and leverage, as they've already seen a mass exodus of deposits leave the banking system chasing yield into treasuries. I'm sure the last thing they want is to see legal tender in gold, which would be a far, far, far more sound way of holding your wealth. And, you know, people get too focused on return or yield. There is no yield on gold, obviously, and they focus too much on that. But if you look at its performance over the last 25 years, it's doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury. So it doesn't need yield attached to it, because inherently what it does is it maintains your purchasing power. It sniffs out the stealth monetization or the stealth inflation that is inherent to the system and continues to move higher. Whether you look at last year, gold was up 40%, the 10-year treasury up 4.5%, or this year, the 10-year treasury up 2.5% halfway through the year, but the dollar down 10. You're negative 7% in the hole plus, yet gold's up 38%. So when you talk about allowing the constituents the ability to get out of the way of irresponsible fiscal policy and arguably brain-dead monetary policy, it would be the best thing in the world for the constituents. Jason, am I wrong in saying that it was a unanimous bipartisan vote in Utah, but for whatever reason, the governor vetoed for the first time a unanimous bipartisan agreement? Am I wrong in saying that?
So it was unanimous, I think, in the House, and I think nearly unanimous in the Senate. And it's certainly certainly of his own party, the Republicans, was unanimous. And I don't think that's ever happened before.
Is reasoning in that case when you have the entire will of the people and the majority of the legislature saying, yeah, let's do this. The state feels it's smart enough to add 100 million into its coffers. Yeah, I mean, what you are doing, Jason, not only in building a wonderful business, but also in really representing sound money, and in many respects, the United States, the will of the people with the legislature is fantastic. And it's a growing trend that I think will continue to manifest. You're seeing it here in Florida. I spent time with some of the people in the economic war room yesterday on the phone going over all of this. And I think really this is a grassroots movement that is gaining momentum, certainly around the country. So it's exciting to see. And
you know, if you zoom out far enough, this whole thing starts to look like a bad rerun. We've seen this before. Nixon in '71 decoupling the dollar from gold. Roosevelt in '33 confiscating gold and revaluing it overnight. Twice in 1 century, we've weaponized the gold price to save the financial system. And here we are again, just a few steps away from another monetary sleight of hand, this time dressed in digital robes and wrapped in sound finance branding. Let me get back to Judy Shelton's proposal, 50-year treasuries tied to gold. I mean, on the surface, it sounds almost fantastical, right? But let's be honest, does anything else actually pencil out anymore? We've got close to $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. The math is screaming at us like a toddler on sugar. You can't pay that down with $5 trillion a year in revenue. And you definitely can't keep refinancing it with short-term paper unless you're trying to set the banking system on fire, which, judging by the state of commercial real estate, regional bank balance sheets, and Fed policy, we're already halfway there. So instead, we enter this bizarro world where suddenly the most old-school asset on the planet, gold, is getting pulled back into the spotlight, not as a currency anchor, but as a yield support mechanism. You peg a 50-year treasury to gold, And suddenly you don't need to pay a 9% coupon to get people to buy it. The inflation hedge is built in. It's elegant. Even Rickards, who gets flack for being dramatic, has laid out this blueprint. A $24,000 gold price to match the M2 money supply. That's not some random moonshot, that's math. And here's the twist. You don't even have to make it convertible to the public. In fact, you probably shouldn't. If you make a gold-backed treasury available only to sovereigns and large institutions, central banks, pension funds, you preserve the confidence game in the fiat system while locking in demand for treasuries. That's the genius of it. You let the dollar float and inflate and wither, but behind the scenes, you give the institutions an escape hatch. Gold backing, quiet, formal, opaque, just like they like it. There's historical precedent here too. The Treasury Gold Certificate account was created under the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. When Roosevelt confiscated private gold and revalued it from $20.67 to $35 an ounce, the government booked a tidy profit. That profit was used to inject capital into the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and the banking system. It was basically a massive stealth bailout. Today, that same playbook could be used again. Revalue gold, book the difference, and plug the fiscal gap. And let's not forget, the US doesn't have to own all the gold. It just needs to declare a higher price. If gold is sitting in private vaults, in ETF custodianships, in COMEX warehouses, fine. The government can revalue gold unilaterally, and everyone holding it gets richer in dollar terms. The real magic is in how it lets the Treasury monetize gold without actually selling any of it. That's the alchemy here. It's like printing a $1 trillion coin, except the coin is gold and it's already been mined.